Hello, welcome to the Manual Handling Collective. I'm your host, Simone Hepburn. I'm a physio and manual handling educator, and I'm passionate about injury prevention. This is a podcast where I speak frankly with the brain's trust of manual handling and other amazing industry leaders in and around the occupational health and wellness community. You get to meet them, you get to be inspired, you get to learn from their stories, and you get to stay up to date with the latest and greatest in manual handling and wellness. So let's crack on. Today's guest on the show is Tracy Nowicki. Tracy is the clinical nurse consultant or the nurse manager for a central equipment store in a large 600-bed metropolitan hospital in Brisbane. A little bit about Tracy. She started her career as a registered nurse in 1986 and now specialises in pressure injuries, prevention and the management of them, as well as bariatric care and management. Tracy's often called on as a speaker and she sits on various high-level committees. And when I say high-level, I mean some of them are global high. She sits on the Global Review Committee for Pressure Ulcer Guidelines and also in her spare time organises educational events and conferences through her company Pressures Down. Have I missed anything, Tracy? Are they the main?
I started nursing in 1980, and the pressure injury one, Pressures Down, I've actually folded that now because the business partner found it too hard working full-time and having a company as well.
Did you fit all that in? Okay.
Yeah, but I'm getting so much work through the companies that I don't need to worry about running my own events.
You've got a lot on your plate. So it's fair to say we are lucky to have your brains and the brains trust of the Manual Handling Collective today. And I know that your work in pressure injuries and bariatric care overlaps so much with what my listeners in manual handling are passionate about. So we are very pleased to have you on the show and looking forward to your insights. So today's podcast, we're going to break into two parts. So firstly, we want to talk about all your expertise in the skin integrity bariatrics and the patient handling side. And then part two, we're going to dive into what's happening currently around the COVID-19 in the acute hospital settings. So firstly, tell us a little bit about your journey in nursing and how you've come to be specialising in pressure injuries and bariatrics and what attracted you to these areas.
Okay. So I started nursing in 1980, so I've just celebrated my 40 years of nursing. Woo. And I have to say that I have never had a bored day at work, and it's been an absolutely fantastic career. I feel very privileged to have had the career that I've had and the opportunities that I've had to be involved with the development of pressure injuries and the care of the bariatric person and the model of a central equipment management. So my primary job is pressure injuries, falls, bariatrics, and managing 120 different types of equipment.
Is that all? Yeah.
As well as the intravenous, the infusion pump side of IV medication safety.
When we talk about bariatrics, a lot of people are surprised if I do some training. They're always surprised if I talk about, the heaviest patient that I've worked with. And somewhere for me is around about 330 kilos.
Yep.
With your experience, what's the heaviest patient you've worked with?
Yeah. So this question's an interesting one because we tend to get very focused on kilograms, and we know that it's kilograms, BMI, and waist circumference that actually gives us a true picture of the bariatric person. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot more to it than that when we look at the person's ability, what their comorbidities are. And like we've had patients that say they weigh two patients that weigh the same, say 220 kilos, and their ability to engage, mobilise, stopping staff from getting hurt, they're very, very different. It's all so one person could have an abdomen that is like a boulder that's rock hard, we can't bend them, and another person could have an abdomen that is like a mudslide that just takes off when you try and sit them up. I mean, that's a bit crass way of saying it, but I think particularly on a podcast, people can understand what I'm trying to say there. So when we look at the heaviest person in our district, it has been 400 kilograms. having, in my hospital, it's been about 363. But where it gets complicated is when you have, like, we had 280s in intensive care at the same time. Particularly in our rehab unit, when you've got 3 or 4 in at the same time, that's when the staff start getting stressed and
your
exhausted.
resources and your equipment gets stretched.
Yeah. I'm pretty happy with what we've done with the resources now, and that's another story. So
Yeah, I do have another question about that I will hit you with a bit later. So over your 40 years now of nursing, can you tell us a little bit about some of the major influences or mentors or people who've given you good advice, and what's that been?
Yeah. So I actually didn't answer your question very well on the first one when I said, I've been nursing for 40 years, and I think one of your questions was, why did I go nursing? And I'm probably going to give you an answer that will be a bit odd and not what, most people say, I really want to look after people. And of course that's part of it. But some of my criteria were I needed an active job. In the day of 1980, most people either became hairdressers, school teachers, or nurses. But in reality, I came from a very dysfunctional upbringing. I actually had nowhere to live. So joining nursing gave me the nurses' quarters, which put a roof over my head, and some really good food. So I also then joined a community of nurses. We're all living in the nurses' quarters, and we had a great time. And I'm just eternally thankful for the opportunities that I've had. It really got me going. It was fantastic. So that's probably a different answer than what most people tell you as to why they went nursing.
It is.
Yeah.
And
I had no.
Yeah,
Go
wow. Influences and mentors, how have they helped you along the way? Is there anything that's stood out to you?
Okay, so influences, like the first one I've just alluded to was surviving my childhood. I was brought up with a very violent alcoholic. So I needed to find an occupation that could make me independent. And this drive started in me from about grade 1, where I needed to really work out how I was going to get out of there. And so that kind of started. And then I remember when my grandmother was put into a hospital, the nurse in charge thought, this kid's going for the streets. She thought I would never be able to do anything with my life. And 2 years later, she saw me coming down with my little white cap on and my little starched white uniform. And she was so happy to see me and said, I can't believe you're here. And so that was the sort of the start of that. And there's been a lot of people that have helped me. And I think one of the things in nursing is it makes or breaks depending on leadership. People that are visionary, people that are good communicators, and people that understand. I feel like I got into trouble a lot when I was training. It was a very strict environment. But when you get someone that really understands you. So if I go right back, I really give tribute to one of my school teachers who gave me, I was doing advanced maths, and I was failing by 2%, and he gave me that extra 2%, which passed me to get me into nursing.
Wow.
So if he didn't do that, I wouldn't have got started. So one of the messages I'd like to give this podcast is all of us can influence people differently, and sometimes you don't know what the link is that you're going to be in someone's life. So I look back on that teacher who's deceased now, and I did go back and thank him. I was knocking on his door every day trying to understand maths, and he helped me a lot, but he gave me 2% for effort. And if he didn't do that, I wouldn't have got the start. And I'd love to show him where I've been able to get my career to. So that was one big thing. The other people that inspire me are my direct team. I get really excited about coming to work and being with them. And particularly in this time of difficulty with COVID, I just feel like I've got to skip in my step going to work just to be with the people I work with. We're like a well-oiled machine, and we look at what each one's doing really well, and instead of competing, we complement, and I think that really influences how your day goes.
Yeah, and a lot of what goes on in acute hospitals, and with the challenging patients and challenging circumstances, can get really frustrating. And I feel that in the industry, some people getting overwhelmed or frustrated, but we all have to keep pushing forward. Which is my next question about how do you keep your energy up? I can see your bike in the background. And I'm wondering if perhaps exercise has something to do with it for you.
Yeah. So when I was working those long hours, I was going to work in the dark and coming home in the dark. And I eventually started to feel like this potato sitting in front of a computer. And so I started going to the gym and started these spin classes. And I was about 48 at the time. And the spin classes sort of gave me the confidence to start. I mean, I've always ridden a bike as a kid, but it gave me the confidence to then think, well, I'm 48. If I don't start this soon, I need to give this a go. So I was very keen to get going on cycling, and I became addicted very quickly. I ride about 200 to 250 kilometres a week now, and it just like I try and ride about 30, 35 kilometres before I start work. I get to work about 7, and I'm just feeling really pumped and excited to be there if I can get out amongst the eucalypts and listen to the birds and climb a few mountains. It's absolutely fantastic.
I can feel your enthusiasm coming through the microphone, Tracy.
Yeah, but I think also with that I think we all need to get more outdoors time. We need to get enough sleep. It really worries me when you see these high achievers are not. Yeah, you really need to get enough sleep. And another thing is about being connected. So even in this time of isolation, using FaceTime, and you can really put a spark into someone's life if all you do is just ring them and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. How are you going?" And that just really turns people around. So I really try and make an effort, even if it's once a week, just have someone over for dinner when we're not in isolation.
Yeah.
And people love that sort of stuff, just the fact that they've been thought of enough.
Yeah.
I think now society it's easy to eat out, but I just say to people, come and have whatever we're having, and I'd love to see you. And I just remember as a kid being so isolated, and just a few people that and it's just so important. And the other thing is chocolate. Chocolate's a good one.
That's one of my favourites.
Yes.
You're preaching to the converted.
Good quality chocolate. And the other thing is...
Isn't that the currency of nursing?
Yes.
Chocolate.
Yes, exactly right. Well done. And I think the other one, as I've mentioned before, is I get a lot of energy from watching my team grow and seeing them respond to challenges. I kind of call it walking the plank. They say, "Oh, I can't do that. I don't know how to do it," and off they go on the plank. And I just love watching them grow and develop. That really gives me a lot of energy.
Cool, I like that. And talking about connecting was one of the ways to maintain energy, and that's hopefully the intent of this podcast, opportunities for people to listen in and get to know some of the network of people. I know that you love your conferences and presenting and events and speaking, and you've organised loads of conferences. What's on your hit list this year, and or maybe next year? This year might be a bit quiet. And do you have any conferences coming up that you're organising?
Okay. I've pretty well got that into routine. So for many years I didn't go to Wounds Australia because I thought I'm not a wound consultant. But now they've really got a good stream of pressure injury prevention. That usually there's always a session going for the whole 2 days on pressure injuries, and this has really helped me to network with some really fantastic people, and it keeps you up to date. I think sometimes they can be too research focused. I really want some more practical, hands-on stuff. I remember going to the first bariatric. It was an obesity congress in 2006. And there was a whole lot of studies on rats being powdered by doctors doing research, and a lot of dietitians. And they gave us this dried up little lunch box. And I went up and I said, I actually haven't come here to lose weight, but there's not a lot of information here. I need stuff to say, hey guys, we need to be heading this way. And that's the real challenge with bariatrics. Very hard to find sort of hands-on help, because everything focuses on research and surgery. So with the pressure injuries, I really love to go to Wounds Australia. The next one is I really advise people to look at NPUAP, which is now NPIAP, the National Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel in America. They're absolutely brilliant. They're every year. They do a big one every second year. And then EPUAP, which is the European one, and that's how I've got to meet all the greats around the world and see what's going on. Then Informa. Sorry?
I was just thinking I might get this list off you at the end and we'll pop it in the show notes. People can have a little browse through.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so the Americans, they do some really good research. They're very active. The Europeans are a little bit, they give more opportunity for people like us to present. So I started going to them in 2009 when they released their own set of guidelines before the Pan Pacific, the Australians released theirs. So that's where I started to learn who was who and got to bring out some really good contemporary stuff back to Australia. But Informa is another one. It's quite an expensive conference, but they tend to get key stakeholders and you get a lot out of those conferences. They do a pressure injury, falls and fracture course every second year because they're not competing with Wounds Australia. And then at the hospital I work at, we run a annual bariatric conference. We had, so I had 130 people attend that this year. It's a sellout every year, and we have 14 trades. So I think with bariatric conferences, trade is really important because it's so expensive to move that big, heavy bariatric equipment around the country for people to actually get a hands-on go at it. Yeah. So that's been a really, really valuable exercise. But I also learn a lot from the companies are very generous with putting on after-hours education. So, sometimes I put a dinner or canopies and you get to meet people. They often bring international speakers out. So keep your ear to the ground for those events. They're very worth going. And it's also not just the content, but it's also keeping connected and finding out who's around for these sort of things. I think in the bariatric field, I think we're quite behind. And there was an AusBig group that dismantled. Yep. So my understanding is
that's where we first met. I think on the Gold Coast committee for the AusBig conference.
Yeah, you got a good memory. So that's a blur. But I think my understanding is that QBig is the only one that's continued to keep going. And so what I try and offer with that is a video conference twice a year. So at the beginning of the year, we run the Bariatric Symposium, and then twice a year we run a video conference that everyone can link into, and hopefully we can all share information, try to keep the Queensland dream alive.
I like it. Leads me to my next question. You're so comfortable behind the mic, Tracy. You do so much speaking and teaching, I can tell. What I want to know is, was it always this way, and have you had to work on that? I know a great story of a doctor I used to work with who was so shy when they first started their career. They enrolled themselves in NIDA, the acting school, to try and get their presentation skills going. It was that important. But have you done anything special to work on your presentation skills, and what's that been like for you?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that. I would actually like to go back to school and tell all those teachers that write on every year on my report card, talks too much in class. I'd like to tell them that I can make some good money out of speaking. So I'd like to tell them that. So I think it's because my attention span is so short that I've kind of don't like the stuffiness and being spoken at, and that's why my presentations are quite, well, I hope for the feedback I get is that they're quite engaging. I try and use a lot of healthcare workers. They don't go into health to look at data. They go in to really make a difference in people's lives. So there's a lot of heartstring stuff.
Patient stories.
I usually try and, yes, exactly. The patient stories are big. And I always like to try and start with a patient story and some videos, even sometimes a video that's maybe not directly relevant. And just because I think PowerPoint is killing us. And so I like to...
Death by PowerPoint is a real thing.
Yeah, so that's why it's exciting what you're doing. So the whole thing is about talking with and not talking at. I think throwing pens and lollies around the room, it puts a lot of energy into the room. Yeah. I think transferring that energy to people and getting the audience has a lot of knowledge, and trying to get that knowledge out of the audience and getting that adult participation is really important. And then particularly when you're talking about bariatrics, is having that hands-on demonstration. that's quite vital, so we know that we're all going to be tired at the end of the day. So always putting the afternoon aside for a hands-on rotating workshop, I think really works. Yeah, that practical stuff. So, yeah, lots of pictures. I like lots of pictures, not lots of words.
Yeah, I like that.
Haynes Medical Australia are innately curious, solution-focused and always keen to share expert insights on keeping staff and patients safe. That's why today's Manual Handling Collective podcast is proudly brought to you by Haynes Medical Australia.
The other question I wanted you to touch on was working with suppliers. And I know, running an equipment store, that's part of your bread and butter. Have you got some advice for staff when they're looking into dealing with suppliers, particularly around bariatric equipment?
Yeah.
Any success stories or?
Yeah, when I was doing the pre-reading for this, I was really pleased you asked that question. And this is one of my most passionate things in my career is I really want to see healthcare start to really value the partnership that we can have with companies. And embarrassingly so, I think that a lot of, if I can only speak for nursing, I think that sometimes we treat companies quite poorly. So if you look at both sides, sometimes I see these company reps come in and they can't talk my language. They're talking about decubitus ulcers, pressure ulcers when we changed the term pressure injury in 2012. And then I look at them and see this flashing sign on their forehead saying tourist, that they haven't really done their research.
Away. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first started, it was 20 years ago, I started in the equipment service. I was trying to help these people, but found that they didn't last long. But I also found company representatives that were really passionate about making a difference. And I think nurses sometimes think they're just there to make a buck. And I'm hoping they are making a buck, because when they don't, they don't stay, and they're not there to support us. But I've met the most incredible people through the equipment service, and people say to me, some of the company reps say, when I come into your office, I feel very different to what I feel in other offices, and I want them to come in and feel valued. And I think some of the things that we can do to respect them are not using this power monger game that some people feel they have over companies and looking down at them. Reading their literature they give you. They were my teachers at the beginning of this. There was and we don't see it as much as we used to, where there was a lot of research going on, and they'd give you these really nice glossy brochures to read, and I'd spend all night reading them, and I really learned a lot through them. And some of these people are healthcare workers or would have liked to have been if they had the opportunity. I find my job, it's absolutely fantastic. So working with suppliers and getting the multidisciplinary team with the suppliers. So an example I would use is seating. Seating is very undervalued in health. They're just chairs just arrive. They're not monitored, they're not audited, they're not maintained. They just exist until we find these broken, dilapidated chairs. So when I started looking at how do we make a chair valuable, I started to find we had something like 1,980 chairs, and very few of them had safe working loads on them. But it was a dietitian that was the one that got me interested in chairs. So why weren't people being fed? Because they weren't able to sit them out.
Because
and
the
why
chair
couldn't they
wasn't
sit them out?
appropriate for their weight.
Or there wasn't enough chairs, or they were broken, all that sort of stuff. So I've got a seating replacement program going now, which has been incredibly successful. But to choose the right chair, I had everyone involved. So it's finance, it's the product resource, it's the dietitians, it's the OTs, it's the physio, it's the manual handling, infection control, the wardsman. Getting everybody involved and then getting that buy-in is absolutely fantastic. So giving the companies the opportunity to showcase. So getting, you set up a whole heap of rooms, you have a different company in each room, and then you rotate that multidisciplinary team to each room, and being prepared. Having a template of what we're looking for, getting everybody on side, and giving the companies a fair chance, because often they feel that we haven't listened to them and they haven't been able to show why is this chair $500 dearer than the other one. They haven't been able to show those benefits.
Mm.
You know,
a lot of people don't. I find from my experience, they don't realise they can have a trial either. They oh, can we get a free trial? Huh. You know,
Yeah.
even the basics like that of, you know, using that opportunity to test some equipment out.
Yeah, and when you're talking
always
about
encourage
bariatrics, that's really tricky, because it's about I think about 60 to 80% of our bariatric patients come in unannounced. So having that equipment on standby for the right person is challenging.
How close do you think we are to having access to a higher stack of equipment for bariatrics that you could just hire it for the length of their stay, perhaps?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. That model's been very well set up in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So there's a particular company that actually keeps, like in your lower storage of your hospital, they keep in a lock. There's like an iPad, and you get a code to unlock what you want, whether the mobile bariatric patient or the immobile bariatric patient, and you hire the equipment by the hour.
Wow.
And it's it's quite, so it's already on site. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic, because what started me with my bariatric journey was, first of all, we had to hire a bed for a one-night sleep study, and we had to hire it for a week, which cost us $1,000. That was my first thing that started me. And then the second thing was, we had this bariatric patient who wasn't that heavy, and he had been bariatric all his life, and he got we had his bed, and he had his motorised scooter, so we could get him from the bed to the scooter, but we couldn't get him from the scooter to the bed.
Right.
Yeah, so we had to build a ramp, and he was a really smart guy. I learned so much from him, and what he said to me was, a lot of important people have come to my bed, but no one's actually looked at me. And that really upset me. And then
You mean
what I learned,
look him in the eye, or just
they were making decisions across him and tend to yell, speak loudly to him like he's stupid, when really he's just an oversized guy. He told me about how different ethnic groups perceive him differently. Like, and I don't want this to sound racial, but sometimes some of the Asians see sumos as sexy, so they all think he's cool. Whereas another group could think, well, you're so fat and lazy, you're stuck in a wheelchair, you can't even walk. He gets, in one day going to the park, that's the type of different perception he can get. So he got kind of stranded in bed and got labelled as weak-willed and lazy. And I'm embarrassed to say, I'd like to say it was the visitors and the other patients making these derogatory comments, but in fact it was the staff. So that's what started me on my journey of what I call changing the mindset. And changing the mindset is not about trying to get fat people to eat less and exercise more. Changing the mindset is about getting healthcare workers to understand how we've become the third fattest country in the world, and understanding the influences that make people overweight. And perhaps if we understand them, we might be able to care for them. And part of that is equipping our hospitals and our facilities with the right resources so we can care for them with dignity and respect. So initially I was criticised for buying equipment, and they said, they're all going to come here if you buy that. And I said, they're not coming, they're here now. And I want you to be safe, and to do that you need the right equipment. But your initial question asking me around equipment, the initial equipment, and it's slowly getting better, but most of the equipment originally with bariatrics was just big. It was very industrial, so it's very unattractive, and it doesn't mean it's actually functional. And one of the problems we got with bariatrics, like if you look at cardiac surgery or renal surgery or geriatrics, orthopedics, everybody has their specialty, and the equipment is very specialised. There is no other branch of medicine that wants one answer. Everybody wants a bed for bariatrics or a chair, and that does not work, because bariatrics fits into surgical, medical, pediatrics, geriatrics, mobile patients, bedridden, intensive care. So the bariatric
across
bed
all
we need
specialties.
exactly. So the bariatric bed that we need in intensive care is very different. It needs then for the paralysed, dialyzed bariatric patient to the bariatric bed that we need in orthopedics, that they need like a self-help pole that they can lift themselves around the bed. So this is, and as opposed to the mobile independent patient who's just come in for a one-night sleep study. So this is the message I'm trying to get across, is you will not find one answer. There is no pot at the end of the rainbow. We need to have a selection to titrate this equipment to this individual's needs. The word I'm trying to get people to understand is bariatrics is about looking at what this individual needs. And the other thing that I really want people to understand with bariatrics is inside that big body is someone calling out for your help. There's a person inside there that just wants you to look at them, that just wants you to smile at them, and just wants you to understand them. But usually their admissions can be quite traumatic, so they don't present to us till very late, and sometimes too late, until they're in crisis. So what I'm really employing us as a country is to move away from this crisis management into a planned, dignified admission, as we do for all our other patients, whether we're talking about our chain-smoking emphysemas, whether we're talking about our non-compliant patients. You know, all these people deserve a planned, dignified admission.
Well said.
I hope I'm not getting off topic for you.
No, that's awesome. So the other thing I want to talk about was in line with that, into the future of bariatrics. I've seen in America they've been doing like bariatric nursing credentialing. Do you think we're headed in that direction? What do you think about that?
I feel that a lot of that bariatric credentialing that I've seen has revolved around surgical bariatric care, and not really about the, like, if you look
Not
at,
across
we
the
are
specialties, like we said.
Yep, and let's look even further. Let's look at aged care. I could be wrong here, but and I'm giving you my opinion here. I'm not giving you statistical analysis, but I feel that the government sees aged care as this frail little 40-kilo fractured knoth, when in fact 60% of them are overweight, and facilities have not been built to care for these people. And I'm constantly getting social workers ringing me saying, I've got a 170-kilo person here that I'm trying to get out of hospital. Do you know anywhere that I can admit them to in a long-term care facility? And we do not have these places. And they're getting stranded in hospitals, which is costing us a lot of money, and they're not getting the appropriate care. So that's only my opinion. I don't have statistics on that. And if we look at all around, let's really, I feel like we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. Let's look at our country. We do not even have a unified bariatric definition. So what does bariatrics mean to you and I, just two people in the room here? You know, you mentioned to me about kilograms, whereas I started to allude to the fact that to truly measure a bariatric patient, we need BMI, kilograms, and waist circumference. But I don't feel like in our health system, we're not really ready to actually say, hey, I'm Tracy, your nurse, and we wrap a tape measure around their waist, because I know, Simone, if I did that to you, you'd probably breathe in as quickly as you could.
I would.
And the other thing is, waist circumference has to be consistent. It needs to be under the iliac, above the iliac crest and under the intercostals. And to get that consistent would be challenging. It needs to be on a patient that can stand upright. So straight away we're knocking out a lot of our patients. I think that the public has started, the government started challenging us as a public to start questioning what is actually my waist circumference, because that is a huge indicator of our likelihood of diabetes and our actual overall health status. But we never walk around saying my waist circumference is, 90 centimetres or 88. We never talk about that. And we don't have appropriate tape measures even in a hospital. So our compromise has been that we've actually looked at width, because if the patient doesn't fit in the width of our chairs,
or sitting
width. Yes, because if the patient is too wide for a chair or a bed, they are not getting the care that they need. We mentioned BMI. Now, BMI is misleading for geriatrics, pediatrics, athletes, and Asians. So if you look at, and New South Wales loves this when I say, if you look at the state of origin team, on the BMI scale, they're all morbidly obese. And I get a cheer from the room every time I say that. And I think all of us, if we could have a show of hands now, have all been caught with accepting the 112 kilo patient. And as they roll through our front door, we realise that they're actually as wide as they are tall, and they're not going to fit in anything standard that we've got. And they're going to take 4 people to look after them and not one. So kilograms has traditionally been incredibly unreliable for us. And you saw this happen when, in 2005, when we brought Judy Waterlow over from the United Kingdom, and we revised the Waterlow tool, which had average, below average, and above average. And we realised that with 5 generations of healthcare workers in our health system, that what I would call average is very different to what you would call average. You're significantly younger than me. And what you would have seen, what I look like as a kid, children at school then would now be called scrawny. Whereas I might look at kids at school now and think they're overweight. So that's when you started to see BMI get introduced. But then we found that healthcare workers weren't even confident doing the BMI formula. So we needed to bring in a BMI calculator, we needed to bring in BMI wheels. So BMI can be very unreliable, and you can have a patient, you could have a state of origin guy with a BMI the same as a morbidly obese person. And as you said before, and particularly with your manual handling experience, it's about functional mobility that will influence the type of care that we can give them.
So just wheeling back around to America's bariatric nursing credentialing, you think that's a bit far down the track for us, and you think that that's probably related more to bariatric surgery as a specialty than it would be useful across?
I've met one bariatric nurse practitioner in Australia, and she was completely surgically focused. Okay. She was incredibly patient focused, and I really admire her very much. She was the same as me, that she had witnessed bariatric patients having very traumatic admissions and wanted to stop that. But as soon as I quizzed her on equipment, she didn't really know much about equipment because her specialty was bariatric surgery. Sure. And if we look at their hospitals, and this is also an opinion and not a statistical fact, from my experience of what I've seen of hospitals doing bariatric surgery, I do not feel that they are prepared. Just on the fundamental basics, I've seen bariatric patients having surgery. They haven't even had a bariatric gown. They've had a standard size gown laid across their abdomen. They haven't had facilities to weigh them, and yet they're doing bariatric surgery in these places. So we are way behind on trying to give these people what you would expect to receive when you came into hospital. So I would like to go back to the things that we need to do in the future of bariatrics is, first of all, agreeing to a bariatric definition. And I think, Simone, you saw that at the Gold Coast AusBig conference. That ended up being a huge outrage, and we didn't succeed. I have done this within my district.
A consensus statement,
yes,
and agreed on the definition. Yes,
and it got very complicated. And I have seen some bariatric definitions that are really fantastic, but way too complicated. So and I think we need to grow into this. So we've actually developed a very simple definition, which is anyone over 120 kilos, anyone with a BMI over 35, and anyone with a width greater than 90 centimetres. That's very simple. I have seen other facilities that have created Barry 1, Barry 2, Barry 3, and this also links in their mobility status, and I fully support that. However, I don't feel we're ready for that yet. I think if we try and bite off more than we can chew, we're not going to be successful in its implementation. And my district got together because they recognised that we needed to do something for bariatrics, and everybody wants to go ahead, and straight away you've got a group on surgery. And I was on the how do you care for the bariatric person, and the very first thing was to all agree on a definition. But whilst we can agree on a definition, are we using that definition, and has that translated into clinical practice? That's another question. So that's the first thing. The second thing is preparedness. And so I think even if you're talking about bariatric continence pads, people don't want to buy them until the patient's there and they need it. So these create very embarrassing admissions. Bariatric chairs, like you can't just have a chair. Sometimes you need a recliner. Sometimes you need a sitting chair. Sometimes you need a commode chair.
Or something
Sometimes you need a shower
motorised
chair.
that's, something
Yes, exactly.
self-propelled or
So
something that's operator-propelled. And
yes, and they're very hard to find that can mobilise around the hospital. So I've worked for years to create a bariatric kit, and then that kit has different levels, and then you need, multiple, some things you need lots of, like lots of shower chairs, and like I said with the beds, you need different types of beds, and then you've got to be able to get the staff to understand how to use all those things. So there's a lot of work to do there. So I feel like when we talk about bariatrics, I still feel like our health system is in a crisis reaction, where we don't have enough bariatric surgery going on yet, and the government is coming on board with that, because at the moment all we're doing is treating the symptoms of chronic obesity. So we're treating the symptoms of diabetes, joint replacement. Exactly. Dialysis units are all booked out. Our sleep apnea units are all booked out as this obesity epidemic continues to grow in our health system. The other thing is, I think we really need to go back to the fundamental basics of getting staff to understand the plight of the bariatric person. As I said to you before, understanding that inside that big body is a person that just needs you to smile at them and understand them. If it was just about sloth and gluttony, we wouldn't be the third fattest country in the world. So understanding the influences, and this came through the Dutch in 1942 after the war, when they asked the question, how did this emaciated pregnant woman give birth to this grossly underweight baby who went on to become an obese adult who then gave birth to obese children? And this is all about the thrifty catch-up mechanism, where us as humans are designed to survive and not to die. And so these underweight babies have this hyperphagia from the first 4 months from birth, and it increases this weight gain, and it influences them to become, and potentially to become, obese as a child, which gives them a 77% increased likelihood of becoming an obese adult. And, so we know that maternal smoking, poor economic environment, exercise, and this interuterine influence can all I already said maternal smoking. All these things can go on to influence. Breastfeeding is another one. If you're not breastfed, and don't throw rotten tomatoes at me for all the women that didn't breastfeed their babies, because I know there's many reasons why. But they're now sort of saying that obesity is increased by 15 to 25% if they're not breastfed. So if someone's born from a lower socioeconomic environment with a maternal smoker into that has been starved in utero, there are many reasons, and hasn't been breastfed, there are many reasons how this person becomes an obese adult. And I'm certainly not making excuses. And we also know that, and I don't want to say that every obese person's had this experience, but with the surge of bariatric surgery, we found people sabotaging their surgery because some people that have been sexually abused as children try and make themselves bigger to be less likely to be targeted again. And suddenly when they start losing weight, they find themselves, they feel vulnerable. So these are things that I think people
attention.
Exactly. And I've heard so many people that said when they were obese, they were invisible and nobody looked at them. They couldn't get served in the shops. And I'm not saying this about all obese people. I don't want this to sound discriminatory. But I'm just saying that as healthcare workers, we need to try and understand their journey.
Lots of reasons, yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
So, sorry. Just with the... Go on, you go.
I was going to say you covered a lot of ground there on bariatrics. Is there something else that you want to say? Because we're probably going to move on to our topic 2 of the morning.
Okay. I just wanted to say about with bariatrics, you've got to grab every opportunity you can for future planning. And we've had such a growth in our health system with redevelopment. So every redevelopment, you get in there and you lobby for the bariatric person and create bariatric rooms, which is quite challenging because Australia doesn't have bariatric room standards. So we need to try and create these rooms that can be used for standard sized patients, but also have the capacity to care for bariatric patients. And when you're doing that, you need to consider in that room needs to be room for the bariatric person, the bariatric visitors, the healthcare worker, and the equipment. So that room gets divided into 4. So grab those opportunities when you can, because they don't come around too often.
I had that experience at the last hospital I was at, a chance to redevelop, and very, very interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
I may not get it again, but
yes. And to do that, you need to plant those seeds early. So if I want to get anything done, you've got to really get your data together, get your stats together. How many staff are being harmed from bariatric patients? What's your incident rate? What facility do you have? How many bariatric patients are coming into your organisation? And so you need to plant that data early, because everybody's competing for money on redevelopment. Right. And so far we've been quite successful with that, and I have 3 different versions of bariatric rooms, each of it having various levels of success.
Well, you've got so much knowledge there, Tracy, and hopefully some of the Manual Handling Collective listeners will get to hear you speak in person one day, somewhere, sometime. And I'll put some links in the show notes of how to get in touch with Tracy, if that's okay, and maybe that list of your favourite conferences that you are recommending. I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thank you.
You have been listening to the Manual Handling Collective podcast. If you're only listening through audio, we've also filmed this episode. If you want to see a little extra, see the link in the show notes. Subscribe to stay notified of future episodes. Like, share, comment, and get in touch to hear more of what you want. If you know a guest who'd be a great fit for the show, just let me know.